Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is this expectation of uh, absolute precision.
Right, it's almost gungeoneering.
Exactly. It's like you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line on a glowing screen, and the doctor just points at it.
And they just say, yep, there it is, that is the problem.
Right. And it's so comforting. It's binary.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, human brains are literally wired to love that kind of visible, categorizable problem. Just put a cast on it, wait 6 weeks, and you're good.
But then you step into the world of complex systemic issues.
Mm-hmm.
And whether that is human neurodevelopment or, in our case today, global macroeconomics, suddenly that x-ray machine is just, well, it's broken.
Yeah, you are looking at a diagnostic landscape that is honestly incredibly murky.
You go in looking for a simple break, but what you actually find is an entire skeleton that is fundamentally changing its shape while the patient is, still walking around.
That is a phenomenal way to frame it, actually, because when you shift from looking at a single broken bone to analyzing the structural evolution of an entire society, you leave the realm of simple diagnoses.
You really do.
You enter the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
And I want you, our listener, to hold on to that exact feeling, that feeling of looking at something that should be simple on the surface, but is actually this incredibly complex, living puzzle.
Because it really is a puzzle.
It is. And today, we are taking a deep dive into source material that feels exactly like looking at a societal X-ray. So, welcome back. If you are insanely curious and you want the ultimate shortcut to being well-informed without drowning in information overload, you are in exactly the right place.
We have a highly unique, truly fascinating stack of sources in front of us today.
Yeah, we aren't just looking at raw spreadsheets, although we certainly have those.
We definitely have the spreadsheet.
Right, but we are looking at a highly specific 15-page academic presentation blueprint. It's a design document specifically created for expert data visualizers.
And it is meant to map out the socioeconomic and demographic evolution of the Isle of Man using big data.
And what immediately struck me about this document isn't even just the data itself.
It's the design rules, right?
Yes, the incredibly strict, almost militant design constraints placed upon the visualizers creating this presentation.
It's fascinating. The document explicitly mandates a pure white background, hex code FFFFFF for any designers listening.
Nothing but pure white.
Exactly. And the primary colors are restricted to a deep, serious navy blue that's hex code 1A365D and a dark gray.
And there's that one emphasis color too, right?
Yeah, a low saturation brick red, but used very sparingly. And it explicitly forbids any 3D graphics, any gradients, or any heavy, distracting imagery.
No fluff allowed at all.
None.
Just pure, unadulterated data. And the rules are so hyper-specific, like key turning points have to be circled with a thin, unfilled red line.
And shifts and trends have to use flat, dashed red arrows with these white, gray-bordered information bubbles.
It's so rigid. And, as I was reading through this blueprint, I realized something.
What's that?
That strict visual discipline. It perfectly mirrors the rigorous mathematical reality of the data we are looking at.
Oh, absolutely.
Like the numbers don't need a 3D pie chart to be dramatic. The math itself is terrifyingly beautiful.
I'm not entirely sure beautiful is the word I would use, but it is undeniably profound.
Fair enough.
Because what this presentation maps out is the Isle of Man country code, IMN, by the way, acting as a perfect, isolated microcosm of human development.
It's classified as a high-income economy in the Europe and Central Asia region, right?
Correct. But more importantly, it is a society that is currently colliding headfirst into a profound structural demographic transition.
Which brings us to the core mission of today's deep dive. We are going to explore a paradox that I honestly just haven't been able to stop thinking about since I opened these files.
It's a tough one to shake.
It really is. The question is this. What happens when a society succeeds so wildly at improving living standards, at building wealth, at extending human life, that its very success creates an inescapable demographic trap?
We are looking at a society that has run the ultimate experiment in human progress and, well, the results are fully in.
And those results totally challenge the foundational assumptions of endless economic growth, don't they?
They really do.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can understand the trap, we have to look at the bait. We have to look at the financial foundation that actually built this society.
So we are looking at page 3 of our source presentation here.
Exactly. The focus is entirely on the long-term macro growth trajectory. We're looking at a combination chart, those deep navy blue bars overlaid with a dark red line that tracks the wealth explosion on the island.
And the sheer scale of the wealth generation is staggering.
It's wild. GDP grew from a baseline of just over $1.1 billion to an absolute peak of nearly $8 billion.
And that is measured in constant 2015 US dollars, just to be clear.
Right? Adjusting for inflation. And it has stabilized somewhat recently around the $7.2 billion mark.
To put that into perspective, an eightfold increase in real GDP isn't just a matter of doing the same things you were doing, just slightly better.
No, not at all.
It represents a categorical shift in what the economy actually is, and the presentation rightly instructs the designer to focus heavily on the per capita metrics to show this.
Right, because total GDP is one thing, but I mean, if your population quadruples while your GDP quadruples, the average person isn't actually feeling any richer.
Exactly.
But that is not what happened here.
Not even close. The data shows per capita wealth crossing from a very modest baseline, under $20,000, and making this massive leap to an astronomical peak of over $95,000 per person.
$95,000.
Yeah, it has since settled into the $86,000 range. But for a sustained period, we're looking at a society that vaulted itself into the absolute highest tier of global economies.
And the blueprint specifically asks the designer to use one of those dashed red arrows to highlight the accelerated growth period, where per capita GDP crosses the $50,000 threshold.
Right, the 50K mark.
Yeah, and I was looking at that and wondering, why that specific number? Like, why is 50 grand the magic threshold that gets the special red arrow?
What's fascinating here is that the $50,000 per capita mark isn't just an arbitrary number.
Okay.
It generally represents a structural phase transition in an economy. When a nation passes that threshold, they have historically moved far beyond basic industrialization.
So no more sweatshops or basic factories.
Exactly. They've moved beyond manufacturing heavy, export-driven grinds. It signifies an economy that has become highly specialized, deeply integrated into global financial systems, and most importantly, capable of generating immense value from intangible assets.
So it's not just making more stuff, it's making money from ideas, services, and networks.
Yes, and that dashed red arrow isn't just saying, hey, we made more money. It's saying, we fundamentally changed our DNA as an economy. They transitioned from being a participant in the global economy to being an elite, high-value node within it.
But wait, let me pause you right there, because here is the thing that completely broke my brain when I was looking at these charts.
Okay, lay it on me.
I am looking at this hyper-wealthy economic mansion they have built. The data proves they are staggeringly rich.
Yeah.
$95,000 per person rich.
Yep.
But then I looked at the data from page 12 regarding their resource dependency.
Ah, page 12.
Yeah. They built this mansion, but they don't own a lumber yard. They don't own a gold mine. They don't have oil derricks pumping off the coast.
The data on page 12 is stark. It explicitly tracks mineral rents and forest rents as a percentage of GDP.
And for the entire timeline, spanning decades of this explosive economic growth, those numbers are exactly 0.0%.
Literally zero.
0.0. It's an entire slide dedicated to data that literally does not exist. So let's act as the confused learner for a second. When the data says mineral rents, what does rents actually mean in this economic spreadsheet? Are we talking about leasing land to mining companies?
That is a vital clarification to make. In economics, economic rent broadly refers to the surplus value generated by a resource beyond what it costs to extract or produce it.
Okay.
So when the World Bank tracks mineral rents or forest rents, they are measuring the raw profit a country makes simply by pulling natural resources out of its own soil and selling them.
Got it.
Think of oil-rich nations in the Middle East or copper-heavy economies in South America. A huge portion of their GDP is essentially the geographic lottery of having valuable stuff in the dirt.
So when the Isle of Man data says their mineral and forest rents are 0.0%, it means they are making absolutely $0 from the geographic lottery.
Exactly zero.
How does a country get that rich with literally zero natural resources fueling it?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that zero data is actually the most important data point on the entire slide.
Really? The zero is the most important part.
Absolutely. It is the ultimate proof that the Isle of Man's economy is completely decoupled from physical resource extraction.
Wow.
When you have 0.0% physical resource rents, it means your wealth is derived entirely from high-value, intangible sectors. We are talking about financial services, wealth management, insurance, e-gaming, and specialized corporate services.
They use their regulatory environment, their political stability, and their highly educated workforce as their natural resources.
That is the perfect way to phrase it. They don't export timber or iron ore, they export trust, efficiency, and digital infrastructure.
Right.
They rely entirely on these invisible sectors to generate the immense capital needed to then import all the physical goods, the actual timber, the food, the fuel required to maintain their incredible high standard of living.
It's like they skipped the physical world entirely and built their wealth in the cloud.
Basically, yes.
But to do that, to live in the cloud, you need a flawless, uninterrupted connection to the physical world, right?
You absolutely do.
You can't run a global financial hub if the lights are flickering or if the server farms overheat, because the power grid is unstable.
That is the exact vulnerability of a pure knowledge economy, and it's exactly why page 10 of the presentation blueprint is so crucial.
Matrix graphic.
Yes. It dictates a very simple graphic, a matrix of 100 small squares, all filled with that solid navy blue, representing 100%.
And what does that represent?
100% electricity access for both urban and rural populations consistently over the long term, alongside near 100% access to basic drinking water and sanitation.
I mean, for a lot of the world, hitting 100% on those metrics is the finish line.
Right.
It's the ultimate goal of development.
But for a hyper-developed, service-based digital economy like the Isle of Man, 100% electrification isn't the finish line. It's the absolute minimum requirement just to open the doors for business.
The bare minimum.
Exactly. If you are a listener on your commute right now, think about the physical infrastructure you are passing. The power lines, the water towers, the fiber optic cables. The Isle of Man hit 100% on that baseline decades ago.
Because you cannot decouple from nature and rely on digital finance without an impenetrable, flawless infrastructure grid.
Precisely. The presentation used that simple 100% graphic to establish that the Isle of Man has completely conquered the basic physiological needs of a modern nation.
Okay, so the Isle of Man has the money, they have the bulletproof power grid, they have the advanced service economy completely divorced from pulling rocks out of the ground.
That utopia is built.
But who exactly is living in this high-tech utopia? And that brings us to section 2 of our deep dive. Let's look at the population dynamics laid out on pages 4, 5, and 8 of the source presentation.
This is where the plot thickens.
It really does. Because on the surface, the overall population growth looks like a slow, steady, healthy climb. The total population grew from roughly 48,000 up to over 84,000.
Which looks great on a chart.
It does. And what's really unusual, at least to me, is that they maintained a perfectly balanced urban and rural split throughout this entire period of extreme wealth generation.
The blueprint directs the designer to use a stacked area chart here, tracking the split, and the urban population consistently stabilizes right around 52%.
Which is wild.
Right.
Usually when a country goes from agrarian to hyper-rich, everyone flocks to the major cities for the high-paying jobs, and you end up with an 80% or 90% urban population.
Yeah.
Why didn't that happen here?
Well, we have to remember the physical geography. The Isle of Man is incredibly small. The entire island is roughly 220 square miles.
Okay.
To put that in perspective, that's smaller than the city limits of Chicago or Toronto.
Oh, wow.
So when your landmass is that condensed, rural doesn't mean you are isolated by hundreds of miles of farmland and disconnected from the economy.
Right.
It means you live in a quiet village that is perhaps a 20 or 30-minute drive from the financial center in the capital of Douglas.
Oh, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
Because of that 100% electrification and infrastructure we just talked about, there's no penalty for living outside the city center.
Exactly. The entire island acts as a single, highly integrated suburban-urban network. You can have the high-paying financial job in the city and live in a rural setting without sacrificing broadband speed or reliable power.
So the population structure remains beautifully balanced geographically.
That's
It looks so healthy on that specific chart, the smooth, upward stacked area graph. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, let's look under the hood.
Because when you peel back the layers and look at how that population is behaving naturally, the whole facade of healthy growth just crumbles.
It does.
Page 5 dictates an area cross-line chart, tracking the crude birth rate against the crude death rate. So let's do another quick definition check. Why do demographers call it the crude birth rate?
It's called crude because it's the most basic, unadjusted metric. It is simply the number of live births occurring during the year, per 1,000 people in the total population.
No adjustments.
Right. It doesn't adjust for the age or sex structure of the population. It's just a raw headcount of new humans entering versus old humans leaving.
Got it. And our designers are instructed to shade the area between these two lines in a pale gray and label it the natural negative growth zone.
Demographers often refer to this visually as the demographic scissor.
The scissor difference, yes. The crude birth rate line has plummeted. It started at 14.15 births per 1,000 people and is just drilled downward to roughly 8.34.
A massive drop.
And meanwhile, the crude death rate has fluctuated but remained higher than the birth rate for an extended period. The lines
Oh,
cross.
well, the scissor close.
Exactly. The society entered a long-term phase where, naturally speaking, meaning without outside migration, the population is shrinking. People are dying faster than babies are being born.
It's a textbook visualization of the low fertility trap. When you look at the raw demographics, the internal natural growth engine of the island has completely stalled out.
But here's the crazy part and the core of the paradox we talked about in the intro. It did stall out because of a famine or a war or some devastating economic collapse.
No.
It stalled out because things got too good.
That is the irony.
If we look at the data on page 8 and 9 regarding social progress as the catalyst, it tells a story of massive societal victory. We see this massive drop in adolescent
It's a
fertility.
huge shift.
Births to young women ages 15 to 19 dropped from roughly 25 down to under 9 per 1,000. And at the exact same time, adult mortality rates absolutely plummeted. We're talking a nearly 70% drop in adult mortality risk.
This is perhaps the most profound paradox in demographic science, and it's essential we unpack why these numbers moved so drastically.
Yeah, let's unpack it.
Because declining birth rates, especially that sharp decline in adolescent fertility, aren't a sign of a society failing. They are the ultimate indicator of a society succeeding on its highest ideals.
But how exactly does a society engineer that kind of drop? I mean, it doesn't just happen by accident.
No, it requires a systemic overhaul.
Mhm.
A drop from 25 to 9 in adolescent fertility means you have successfully provided universal, high-quality education for women. It means you have integrated women fully into the high-value workforce. It means reproductive rights, access to modern contraception, and family planning are deeply embedded in the culture and healthcare system.
So it's a choice.
Exactly. People are choosing to have fewer children, and crucially, they are having them much later in life because they're investing heavily in their own education and careers first.
Right. If you're a teenager on the Isle of Man, you are having a child at 18 because you're in secondary school prepping for university so you can go work at a global insurance firm, making part of that $95,000 per capita GDP.
Exactly.
That is a massive win for human rights, individual potential, and bodily autonomy.
It is a complete triumph, and simultaneously you have the 70% drop in adult mortality.
Which is also a massive win.
Huge. And that isn't just about having good doctors. It represents a fundamental shift in what threatens human life. Historically, and in developing nations, high mortality is driven by acute physical trauma factory accidents, infectious diseases, poor sanitation.
Stuff that just takes you out early.
Right. But when you become a hyper-wealthy service economy with 100% infrastructure, those threats largely vanish.
So what replaces them?
Well, the healthcare system shifts its vast resources toward managing long-term chronic decline, advanced cardiovascular care, oncology, long-term diabetes management.
So you have a society that has conquered early unplanned pregnancies and largely conquered premature adult death. It is a utopian public health outcome.
It is.
But mathematically, it creates an absolute structural nightmare for the shape of the society.
Which perfectly sets up the mathematical collision we are calling the Great Dependency Flip.
Okay, section 3.
Right. Looking at pages 6 and 7 of the source document, we have falling birth rates on one side and dropping adult mortality on the other. What happens when those two lines meet?
They fundamentally change the shape of the society.
They invert the pyramid entirely.
I want you to visualize this chart from the blueprint. It's two smooth lines moving in completely opposite directions. The first line is the youth dependency ratio.
Let's break that down for a second.
Yeah, so dependency ratio refers to the people who aren't in the labor force being supported by those who are, right?
Yes. The standard metric uses the working age population, usually defined as ages 15 to 64 as the baseline.
Okay.
So the dependency ratio is the number of dependents, either under 15 or over 64, compared to every 100 working age people.
Got it. So the first line, the youth dependency ratio, representing the burden on the working age population to raise, educate, and feed kids, That line dropped from nearly 32% down to 22.7%.
A significant drop.
The burden of raising kids is the lowest it has ever been. But the second line is the old age dependency ratio. This represents the burden on the working age population to provide health care, pensions, and support for the elderly.
And that line did the exact opposite.
It skyrocketed from 28.2% to an unprecedented 36.9%.
And the presentation blueprint instructs the designer to draw a thin red circle exactly where those two lines cross.
That is the historic inflection point.
It really is.
It's mind-blowing. Think about the physical infrastructure required for that shift. It's like an entire country shifting its national budget, its urban planning, and its collective societal energy from building kindergartens, playgrounds, and pediatric wards
To building retirement communities?
exactly, memory care facilities,
Right.
and specialized geriatric wings in hospitals. But the group in the middle, the working age people who are actually paying the income taxes and doing the physical and intellectual labor to support both the young and the old, that group is shrinking.
That is the exact fiscal tension defining the modern era of high-income economies. The irony of human longevity is profound here.
It is.
If we look at page 7, the data shows that life expectancy on the island didn't just inch up, it broke through the incredible 80-year baseline.
Wow.
Women are now exceeding 83 years of expected life, and men are nearing 79 years. This is a monumental achievement of modern medicine.
Right.
You have a system that is successfully treating chronic diseases and keeping citizens alive and comfortable longer than at almost any point in human history.
But wait, I have to push back here, or at least play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
If people are living to 83, and the knowledge economy means they're sitting at desks doing financial services instead of doing hard manual labor in a coal mine, can't they just work longer?
That is usually the first proposed solution, yes.
Right. Why is this such a crisis? Can't we just bump the retirement age to 70 and call it a day?
It's a valid question, but it's actually much more complex than just adjusting a retirement dial.
Why is that?
While it's true that a knowledge economy allows for longer working lives than a manufacturing one, cognitive decline and chronic health issues still inherently limit the labor force participation rate of people in their late 70s and 80s.
Okay, that makes sense.
So what here is the sheer fiscal reality of what those late life years cost.
Because an 85-year-old is vastly more expensive to the state than a 5-year-old.
Exponentially more expensive.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. Think about it. Building a kindergarten requires a building, some teachers, and educational materials. Caring for an 85-year-old requires highly trained medical staff, specialized pharmaceuticals, continuous monitoring, and infrastructure that is incredibly capital intensive.
I didn't think about it like that.
And mathematically, this ever heavier financial and physical dependency burden is being placed squarely on the shoulders of a shrinking core of working-age adults.
Let's look at that math again. The 36.9% old age dependency ratio means that for roughly every 3 working people, there's more than 1 person of retirement age who needs to be supported by the economic output of those 3.
And those 3 workers are currently having fewer than 2 kids to eventually replace them.
It's a structural imbalance that cannot be fixed by just telling people to work harder, or even by raising taxes.
Raising taxes actually makes it worse.
Right. If you raise taxes too high on those 3 workers to pay for the elderly care, they won't be able to afford the incredibly high cost of living on the island.
And they certainly won't have the disposable income to start families of their own.
Which just accelerates the low birth rate trap.
Precisely the point. The demographic math is fundamentally structurally unsound. It becomes a self-reinforcing cycle.
Okay, so the natural population is shrinking. The society is aging rapidly, shifting immense capital toward elderly care. And the physical island itself is, well, an island. It is geographically finite.
Very finite.
So how does this economy not simply collapse in on itself under the weight of all these pensions and the severe lack of young workers?
This leads us to Section 4, physical limits and the human buffer.
Because an economy isn't an abstract concept floating in a vacuum.
Right. It has to exist in a physical space subject to the laws of physics and ecology.
Right. And if we look at the data regarding agricultural land on page 11, we see the absolute physical limits of that space.
The carrying capacity.
Exactly. Over the decades of growth, the agricultural land use grew to an absolute peak carrying capacity. They were utilizing around 80% of the entire land mass for agriculture at one point.
Which is an astonishingly high utilization rate. The designer is instructed to circle that 80% peak and label it the land carrying capacity development limit.
What this tells us is that the island literally ran out of room.
You cannot infinitely expand your footprint when you are surrounded by the Irish Sea.
So, if 80% of the land is agricultural, what's the other 20%? Is it just the cities, the roads, and the mountains?
Exactly. The remaining 20% encompasses the urban infrastructure, residential zones, commercial centers, the transportation network, and land that is simply too rugged or mountainous to be cultivated or built upon.
So they maximized it.
Hitting 80% meant they were pushing right up against the edge of what the geography would allow.
But the data shows they didn't stay at 80%. Recently, they've been forced into an ecological pullback, settling back down around 69%. Why the drop?
That pullback to 69% indicates a necessary structural adjustment. When you push land use that high, you begin to experience ecological degradation.
Like what?
Soil depletion, water runoff issues, loss of biodiversity. The pullback likely represents a combination of returning land to nature for ecological sustainability and perhaps repurposing some agricultural land for necessary non-agricultural uses as the population expanded from 48,000 to 84,000.
Ah, that makes sense.
But the absolute boundary condition was met, recognized, and respected.
So what does this all mean? Let's tally this up. You have no more land to expand into. Your native population isn't having enough babies to replace the workforce.
Yep.
Your elderly population is growing massively and requires immense financial and medical resources to support. How in the world is the Isle of Man still functioning as an elite, high-income economy?
The answer is on page 13, the waterfall chart.
The immigration lifeline.
Exactly.
The data details net migration inflows, and it is highly volatile. You look at the chart, and it's jumping up and down year over year.
Very volatile.
But the critical takeaway is that it is consistently, overwhelmingly positive. In some peak years, they had net inflows of over 1,400 people.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, it has stabilized around a net addition of 177 people per year.
This raises an important question about how we view migration in a macroeconomic context.
Right.
It's crucial that we strip away the political narratives here, and the blueprint is meticulously objective in doing so to just look at the raw mechanical data.
We have to confront the cold math of immigration.
We do. When an economy reaches the state the Isle of Man is in, external migration ceases to be a policy choice and becomes the only mathematical shock absorber left.
But wait, isn't importing human capital just a temporary fix? Like, if immigration is just a mathematical shock absorber, what happens in 30 years when the countries that are currently supplying those immigrants hit their own demographic scissor?
That is the big question.
Isn't this kind of a Ponzi scheme built on global labor?
You've just identified the looming global crisis that demographers lose sleep over. It is a temporary fix on a multi-generational scale.
Yeah.
But for the Isle of Man, right now, it is the only viable mechanism available. Without a consistent influx of working-age immigrants, that demographic scissor we discussed would snap shut.
And the labor shortage in critical sectors would be immediate and catastrophic.
Especially in healthcare, right?
You need nurses, doctors, and care workers for that 36.9% elderly dependency class.
Absolutely. Healthcare is highly labor-intensive and incredibly difficult to automate fully. But they also need talent in the high-tech service sectors, the financial analysts, the IT specialists, the regulatory compliance officers.
The people who generate the island's wealth in the first place.
Yes. Immigration is the singular force counteracting the low natural birth rate. It acts as a buffer.
Right.
When the local population cannot supply the labor to meet the demands of the capital, you must import the human capital, or the financial capital itself will flee to jurisdictions that can.
And because they are a pure knowledge economy with 0.0% physical resource rents, human capital is literally all they have. If they don't import brains and hands, they have absolutely nothing to sell.
Exactly. The volatility in the migration data, those massive spikes of 1,400 and drops down to 177, likely correlates directly with global economic cycles, specific labor demands in their e-gaming or financial sectors, or even housing capacity crunches.
Sure.
But the underlying fact remains. Net positive migration is the structural pillar preventing this system from buckling under the weight of its own demographic success.
Okay, this brings all the threads together into what might be the most intense slide in the entire blueprint.
Page 14, yes.
We have the incredible world-class wealth. We have the rapidly aging population that demands massive upkeep. We have the absolute physical limits of the island's geography. And we have the absolute reliance on imported labor to keep the lights on.
Which leads directly into Section 5, the overlay risk, or what the presentation ominously calls stagnation at the summit.
Ominous is the right word. The composite scatter plot.
It's a very complex visual.
The blueprint instructs the designer to create this highly complex visual. The horizontal x-axis is time. The vertical y-axis is per capita GDP. And the data points are bubbles, where the size of the bubble represents the percentage of the aging population.
So as you track this through time, moving left to right across the decades, you see the bubbles rising rapidly up the axis as the wealth explodes.
But then, on the far right side of the timeline, something alarming happens.
They enter the death zone.
The death zone. The bubbles get much larger, representing that peak aging dependency of 36.9%. But simultaneously, their position drops slightly on the axis,
It represents the recent contraction of per capita GDP.
falling from that astronomical peak of $95,000 down into the $86,000 range. They're getting older, and they're getting slightly less rich.
And the designer is told to draw a red dashed box around this specific area and label it the overlapping risk of fading demographic dividends and economic stagnation.
This is where we see the limits of continuous growth. It's like a mountain climber.
Oh, I like this analogy.
Imagine, you've trained your whole life, you've sprinted up Mount Everest, passed all the base camps, and now you are standing at the absolute summit.
You're at the top.
You are in what climbers call the death zone. You are at the absolute highest elevation of global wealth. You've achieved what 99% of the world only dreams of.
Right.
But the oxygen up there for new growth is incredibly thin. And your demographic muscles, your working age population, are aging rapidly. You can't just hang out in the death zone forever without highly specialized support, or you'll freeze.
That is a phenomenal analogy, and we can actually stretch it even further.
How so?
In macroeconomic terms, we call this dynamic high base macroeconomic pressure. When a developing nation is growing, when they are still at base camp, it's easy to show massive percentage gains in GDP because you are starting from a low base.
Right.
Building your very first hospital or paving your first national highway system yields incredible, immediate economic returns.
All right, going from $10 to $20 is a 100% increase. Going from $90,000 to $91,000 is a tiny fraction, even though it's 100 times more actual money.
Yes, exactly. But when a society achieves a top-tier global benchmark, when you already have 100% electricity, when your citizens already live to be 83, when your per capita income is nearing 6 figures, maintaining that level of growth requires immense, unprecedented innovation.
Because what else is left to build? You've already built the utopia. You have the clean water, the broadband, the long life.
Exactly. The low-hanging fruit has been harvested decades ago, and the pressure to innovate is compounded immensely by the demographic reality pulling in the opposite direction.
How so?
Well, true economic innovation requires risk capital, and it requires a dynamic, youthful workforce willing to take chances, start new companies, and disrupt old industries.
But the youth workforce is shrinking.
Yes. And when a massive, ever-increasing portion of your national GDP absolutely must be diverted simply to maintain the status quo, to fund elderly health care, to pay out public pensions, to build assisted living facilities, that is capital that is not being deployed into aggressive new economic ventures or disruptive technologies.
The aging demographic acts as a massive gravity well, pulling capital away from future growth and toward maintaining the past generation.
It's the friction of gravity catching up to the rocket ship, so that contraction from 95K down to 86K isn't necessarily a sign of a failing, collapsing economy.
It's just the cost of doing business at the summit.
Yes, it's the sheer cost of keeping the promises made to an aging population, combined with the extreme difficulty of growing an already massive pie. The Isle of Man is incredibly wealthy, but it is now fighting a structural headwind that money alone cannot simply wave away.
Which perfectly sets up the outro and the grand synthesis of this 15-page masterclass in data visualization.
The conclusions.
Yes, the final page of the source document outlines 3 core conclusions that the designer must present clearly and academically. Let's break them down.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, the Isle of Man has successfully achieved a globally elite development baseline. They beat the game of basic human development. The GDP, the 100% infrastructure, and the lifespan metrics put them in the absolute top tier of human societies.
It's an undisputed victory of policy and adaptation over the last half-century.
It really is. Second, the aging population structure is permanent and irreversible.
We aren't going to suddenly see a cultural shift where families are having 6 kids again while women are trying to maintain careers in global finance.
Exactly. Therefore, the island must build a deeply sustainable fiscal model specifically tailored to support long-term health care and pensions without bankrupting the state. The old models of taxation simply won't work when the dependency ratio flips this hard.
They have to engineer a soft landing in the death zone.
And third, the future engine of growth must rely on two interwoven strategies: optimized immigration policies to continually replenish the labor force, and a doubling down on non-resource dependent, high-tech service sectors.
They have to keep inventing the future in the cloud.
Because as page 12 showed us, they have exactly 0.0% physical resources to fall back on if the cloud dissipates.
It is a stark, mathematically sound, and entirely unsentimental roadmap for a post-industrial, hyper-developed microstate.
And as a listener, I want you to take this framework we just built, this understanding of the demographic scissor, the dependency flip, the zero-resource knowledge economy, and the Everest death zone, and apply it to your understanding of global news.
It changes how you read the headlines.
It really does. If you are sitting on your commute or washing the dishes, think about the headlines you see every day. When you read about declining birth rates in other nations, or heated debates over immigration quotas, or the soaring costs of national health care, remember the math we unpacked today.
It's never just one issue happening in a vacuum.
No, it's a deeply interconnected ecosystem.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, that leads to a final thought I think we really need to sit with.
What's that?
The Isle of Man is a tiny, incredibly agile, wealthy microcosm. It's a controlled laboratory of 84,000 people. But looking at this data, we have to ask a terrifying question. Is this tiny island actually a crystal ball?
Wow.
If an economy this wealthy, this structurally adaptable, and this highly educated struggles with the success trap of extreme longevity and shrinking birth rates, how in the world will the massive, slow-moving superpowers of the world cope?
I mean, they won't have the agility of a 220-square-mile island.
Exactly. When this exact same demographic math catches up with the massive multi-trillion-dollar economies of Europe, Asia, and North America in the next 20 years, they can't just pivot their entire workforce into e-gaming and offshore finance.
Right.
How will they navigate the death zone when there aren't enough young immigrants left in the world to act as a mathematical shock absorber for everyone?
It makes you look at that societal X-ray a little differently, doesn't it?
It really does.
You go in looking for a simple break, a clean line showing what is wrong with the economy that can be fixed with a quick policy cast. But instead, the image comes back showing that the skeleton itself is fundamentally changing shape.
The diagnosis isn't that the society is broken.
No. The diagnosis is that the society succeeded so brilliantly at its original goals that it evolved into something entirely new, something that requires a completely different kind of medicine. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. Keep questioning the data around you, look for the dashed red lines in your own life, and we will see you next time.